What if the life you are living right now is a game and you have already lost it once? Stop. Think about that for a moment. Not as a metaphor, not as a philosophical exercise, literally. What if everything you call reality, every choice you have made, every wound you carry, every betrayal that still keeps you awake at 3 a.m, was just the first playthrough? What if there was a save file somewhere with your name on it, and the version of you that exists right now is not the original? This is not a question I am asking lightly. This is the question that destroyed a man named Ren Haywood, and it is the question that gave him everything back. My name is Luna, and tonight I am taking you inside one of the strangest case files I have ever opened. A story that begins with a murder broadcast to 4 million people and ends with a discovery that should not be possible inside any system, virtual or otherwise. I have spent the last 6 months piecing this together from fragments,
stream archives that were scrubbed within hours, server logs that were never supposed to leave the data centers, testimony from people who, frankly, should not be talking to anyone. And what I found, what I am about to show you, is going to change the way you think about second chances. But before I show you the answer, I have to show you the fall, because without the fall, the rest of it makes no sense. And the fall happened on a Thursday night in late autumn, in a server cluster that was supposed to be the most secure entertainment platform ever built. 10 years of one man's life erased in 11 minutes, by the people he trusted most. You are going to want to stay until the end of this one, because the last thing I uncovered, the thing that nobody was supposed to find, is not just about Ren Haywood. It is about every single one of us. And the part where I explain that, where I lay it all out, is going to come after I take you through the entire path he walked, step by step, bug by bug, betrayal by betrayal. So sit back, pour yourself something, and let me tell you about the night the prophet died. The world they called Edenverse was not always a world. It started as a game, a very expensive, very ambitious game, launched by a corporation whose name kept changing every time their lawyers settled a class action. You probably remember the early advertisements. Beaches that felt like real beaches. Mountains that took 3 real days to climb. A combat system so precise that professional fencers said it taught them things their masters never could. Players logged in for 8 hours a day, then 10, then 14. The corporation kept building, kept expanding, kept patching in new continents, new physics, new economies. And then, on a March morning 7 years before our story begins, something happened that the developers either could not explain or refused to. Players who logged out of Edenverse began reporting that the world outside felt thinner, less saturated, less real. Within 18 months, the boundary collapsed. They called it the Great Convergence. Officially, it was a coordinated software update that synchronized the game's environmental engine with augmented reality overlays in the players' home cities. Unofficially, nobody who lived through it could tell you any more where the game ended and life began. The streets you walked to buy bread had quest markers floating above them. The barista at your coffee shop had a level next to her name. Your apartment had a respawn point. And in this strange, new, layered reality, a small number of players had not just adapted, they had thrived. They had become legends. Ren Haywood was the brightest of them. 24 years old, born in a town called Ridgeford, which by his 16th birthday no longer existed in any meaningful sense, having been absorbed into a region the game called the Verdant Marches. His mother, Helena Haywood, had worked in a hospital before the Convergence. After, she worked in the same building, but the hospital had a different name and half her patients paid in game currency. She raised him alone. His father had left when Ren was 9, before the Convergence, before any of this. Helena did not talk about that man. Ren did not ask. What he had instead growing up was a small, worn book that his grandmother had passed down. A book of fables, stories about clever boys and cruel kings and second chances. He read it until the spine fell apart, and Helena taped it back together every time. When he was 13, Helena bought him his first immersion rig, used, refurbished, 3 months of grocery money. She put it on his bed and said, "Only one thing, Ren. Whatever you build in there, build it like it matters, because somewhere, someone is keeping score, even if you cannot see them. He never forgot those words.
He told me, years later, when I tracked him down for the first interview, that those words were the only reason he survived what came next. By the time he was 19, Ren was ranked #1 on the global leaderboard. His handle was simple: Prophet. He had picked it as a joke when he was 15, mocking a streamer who claimed to predict patch notes. It stuck. By the time anyone realized it had stopped being a joke, he had 3 legendary blades, a fortress on the eastern coast of the Marches, and a guild of 47 players who would, by their own public statements, follow him into any fire. The fortress was called Moonhaven. The blade he carried most often was called Moonfang, and the guild was called, with the kind of arrogant elegance that only 19-year-olds can pull off, the Order of the Late Hour. They were, for 3 uninterrupted years, the most feared and most followed group in the entire Edenverse ecosystem. Then came the night that everything ended. The raid was called the Sundering of Velenost. It was the capstone event of a continent-wide arc the developers had been seeding for over a year. 48 hours of continuous combat across a sunken city, ending with a boss that nobody had ever defeated, because nobody had ever survived long enough to learn its mechanics. The official rewards for completing it were unprecedented: account-wide skill bonuses, a unique mount, a title that conferred actual administrative privileges within certain guild halls. The Order of the Late Hour was the first guild to reach the final chamber. 4 million viewers were watching the live stream. The cameras, which in this layered reality were physical drones hovering in the air above the players, captured everything. Ren was in the lead, Moonfang in his right hand, his offhand free because the boss required a particular gesture that could only be made with a bare palm. He had spent 2 weeks figuring that out. 2 weeks reading old patch notes, cross-referencing developer interviews, and finally finding the answer in a single line of flavor text from an in-game book that nobody else had bothered to read. The boss fell in 23 minutes, a new record. The chamber filled with light. The reward chest materialized. Ren stepped toward it, and then the people behind him stepped forward too, not to celebrate, not to share in the moment, to finish him. The first blade entered between his shoulder blades. It belonged to a man named Kai Vorland. Kai had been with the Order for 6 years. He had been at Ren's mother's house for Christmas dinner the previous winter. He had eaten Helena's bread pudding and laughed about how lucky Ren was to have grown up with someone who actually cooked. Now Kai's blade was in Ren's back, and Kai's voice was in the guild channel, calm and clear, saying, "I am sorry, brother. It is just business." The second blade came from a woman named Sarah Lynn. The third from a man whose face Ren could not see in the chaos. By the time he hit the floor of the chamber, 6 of his most trusted lied. Just a small smile, not even mocking, just satisfied. "Brother," he said, "you should have read your own contracts more carefully. The Order does not belong to you anymore. It never really did." The stream cut to black 30 seconds later. The corporation later said this was due to a routine server hiccup. Anyone who has ever worked in server infrastructure will tell you that is not how routine hiccups behave. The blackout was deliberate. Somebody, somewhere, did not want the next part to be seen. The next part was Ren's mother. Helena Haywood had been watching the raid from her kitchen. She had been making tea. The cup was still in her hand when her son's name disappeared from the leaderboard and a small notification appeared above her kitchen table, in the soft blue font that the Convergence used for system messages. The notification said, "Player Prophet has been permanently disconnected. We are sorry for your loss." She did not scream. She did not cry. She set the cup down very carefully on the counter. She walked to the chair where Ren had sat the previous Sunday, eating eggs, complaining about a server lag spike. She put her hand on the back of that chair, and she said, out loud, to nobody, "You come home, Ren. You come home however you can. I do not care what it costs. You come home." I want you to hear that again, because what comes next, what I am going to show you in the next part of this story, hinges on those words. Helena Haywood did not know what the Convergence really was. She did not know what her son had stumbled into. She did not know that somewhere in the architecture of this layered reality, something was listening. something that had been listening for a long time, and something that, against every rule it was supposed to follow, decided to answer. But first, let me tell you what those words mean to anyone who has ever lost someone. Anyone who has watched the person they raised, the person they fed and clothed and stayed up with through fevers, walk into a future too big and too cruel to be survived. Anyone who has stood in a kitchen with a cup of cooling tea and made a promise to an empty chair. There is not one of us watching this who does not know that moment. The moment when love stops being abstract and becomes the only currency that matters. Helena did not own a single piece of legendary gear. She had never killed a boss. She had no rank, no guild, no public profile. But she had something the Order of the Late Hour, with all their stolen blades and stolen titles, could not buy and could not steal. She had the willingness to barter anything for her son. And in the strange logic of a world that had been bleeding game mechanics into reality for 7 years, that willingness was, it turns out, a kind of code, a kind of input, a kind of command line. She sat down at the kitchen table, the tea went cold, the notification faded. And in another part of the architecture, in a place that had no name on any map, a profile that had been marked permanently disconnected began, very slowly, to reload. Ren did not wake up immediately. He did not wake up that night, or the next morning, or the morning after that. From his perspective, he was simply gone. The respawn purgatory ended, and then there was nothing. No darkness, no sensation, just the absence of being. And then there was a ceiling. It was a ceiling he knew. Cracked paint near the corner, a water stain shaped like a horse's head, the smell of coffee from downstairs, and beneath that, the faint metallic tang of his mother's hand cream. He was lying in his old bed, the bed he had slept in as a boy, the bed he had slept in before the Convergence, before the Order, before Moonfang, before Kai Vorlin's blade between his shoulder blades. He could not move at first. Not because anything held him, but because the act of moving required him to accept what he was seeing. He stared at the ceiling for what felt like an hour. Then he turned his head. The window was open. The curtains, the same yellow curtains his mother had sewn from a tablecloth 10 years ago, were moving slightly in the breeze. A small blue notification hovered in the corner of his vision. It said, "Welcome back, player. Profile restored. Achievement history archived. Game start countdown. 3 hours, 14 minutes. He sat up. He looked at his hands. They were the hands of a 14-year-old boy. I want to be clear about what happened in that bedroom, because the testimony Ren gave me about it in the third interview, the one where he finally trusted me with the small details, is the part of this story that researchers in 2 different countries are still trying to verify. He did not just have a vision. He did not just dream that he was young again. He inhabited that body. He felt the difference in his joints. He felt the way his hair sat on his head. He smelled the soap his mother had washed his sheets with that morning, which was a brand she had stopped buying when he was 16 because the company went out of business. He was, in every measurable sense, in his own past. He stood up slowly. He walked to the mirror over his dresser. He looked at his own face, and he did not recognize the boy looking back, because the boy had not yet lived through any of the things that had carved the man Ren remembered being. The boy had no scar above his left eyebrow, because the scar had come from a server crash that knocked him backwards into a coffee table when he was 19. The boy had clean teeth, because the chip in his front tooth would not happen for another 4 years. The boy had quiet eyes, because the eyes that Ren remembered were eyes that had seen 4 million people watch him die. He went downstairs. Helena was at the table. She was younger. Her hair was darker. She was reading something on a paper magazine, which was already by that point in history a slightly old-fashioned. Helena was at the table. She was younger. Her hair was darker. She was reading something on a paper magazine, which was already by that point in history a slightly old-fashioned thing to do. She did not look up when he came down the stairs. She just said, without lifting her eyes from the page, "You are up early, my dolphin. There is bread on the counter. The butter is the good one. Do not eat all of it." He stood at the bottom of the stairs and he could not breathe. My dolphin. She had called him that until he was 10, and then he had asked her to stop because the boys at school had heard it once and made it a thing. She had stopped immediately, without complaint, and she had never used it again. Not once. Not in 14 years of his real, original life. And now she was using it as if no time had passed, because for her, no time had. He sat down across from her. He picked up a piece of bread. He buttered it the way he always had, in long, careful strokes from the center outward. He took a bite. The taste was exactly what he remembered, which was impossible, because memory is not that accurate. Memory smooths things. Memory invents. But this bread was the bread, in the way that only the actual bread can be. Helena looked up. She did not say anything for a long moment. She just looked at him. The way mothers look at their children when something in the room has shifted, when the child has come home from school carrying a weight that was not there at breakfast. She did not know what she was seeing. She could not have known. But something in her face changed, the smallest tightening around the eyes, and she said, in a voice that was suddenly very quiet, "Ren, are you all right?" He could not speak. He just nodded. Once. She reached across the table and put her hand on his hand. It was the hand he remembered, the small callus on her thumb from gardening, the wedding ring she had never taken off even after his father left. The warmth. "You will tell me," she said. "Not now, but sometime, when you are ready, whatever it is, you will tell me." And then she went back to her magazine. I am going to step out of the story for a moment, because what I just described is the part that researchers cannot explain, and I do not want to gloss over it. The notification Ren saw on waking, the one that said, "Profile restored," was real. We have it on log. It appeared in 7,000 other system records that morning, all of them belonging to players who had been declared permanently disconnected within the previous 6 months. Most of those players, when interviewed, reported nothing. They had simply continued their lives. The notification meant nothing to them. But Ren remembered. And the question that consumes every researcher who has ever looked at this case is, why him? Why was he the one who carried his memories backwards? Why did the system, or whatever stands behind the system, choose to give one player a second playthrough with the save file intact when 7,000 others were quietly reset and never knew? I do not have a clean answer for you tonight. I have a theory, and I will share it before we are done, but I want you to sit with the question first. Because the question is older than this story. The question is older than the convergence. The question is, in every culture that has ever existed, the same question. Why do some people seem to wake up knowing things they could not possibly know? Why do some lives feel like a second attempt? Why does the boy in the worn book of fables that Helena Haywood read to her son every night, the boy who outsmarts the cruel king, always seem to have arrived at the kingdom already knowing the king's weaknesses? Hold that question. Now let me tell you what Ren did with his 3 hours and 14 minutes. The game start countdown, the notification at the corner of his vision was telling him that the original launch of Edenverse, the one that had defined the entire arc of his life, was 3 hours and 14 minutes away. In the original timeline, he had logged in 7 minutes after launch because his mother had insisted he eat breakfast first. He had picked the standard starting class, a swordsman, because everyone was picking swordsman. He had spent the first 3 hours of his career doing the tutorial that every new player did, killing wolves outside the starter village of Greenmarch. He did none of that this time. He walked out of the kitchen, kissed his mother on the top of her head, which surprised her enough that she looked up sharply, and he went back to his room. He sat down at the small desk where his original immersion rig was still in its box, unopened, because he had been saving the unboxing for a video he had planned to post. He opened the box now. He set up the rig in 11 minutes, which was a personal record because he had done this setup 3 times in his original life and he remembered every cable. He did not log into Edenverse when the launch happened. Instead, he opened the public developer portal, which in those early days was not yet locked down behind corporate firewalls, and he downloaded the open beta documentation. 12,000 pages of design notes, system mechanics, world maps, and known bugs. He had never read this documentation in his original life. Nobody had. It had been removed from public access 6 months after launch, when the developers realized that some of what they had published gave away too much. But he had 3 hours and 14 minutes. and he had a lifetime of knowing what to look for. He found the first thing he needed within 11 minutes. There was a known bug in the original launch build, never publicly acknowledged, where the starter village of Green March had a hidden underground chamber accessible through a specific sequence of actions performed at a specific stone well. The chamber contained a starter quest that the developers had cut from the final game but had forgotten to remove from the world data. The quest rewarded a blade. A specific blade. A blade called Moonfang. In his original timeline, Moonfang had appeared 7 years after launch as the reward for a continent-spanning questline that required a level 80 character and a guild of 40. He had been the first player to claim it. The achievement had defined his rise. In the documentation in front of him, in the cut content of the launch build, Moonfang was available to any player who could solve a simple environmental puzzle in the starter village. The blade was the same blade. The stats were the same stats. The developers had simply moved it later in the game, after launch, when they realized it was too powerful for an early reward. But the cut version had never been patched out of the launch build. It was still there. It would be there for exactly 17 days, until the first major update removed it. Ren had 17 days to walk into a starter village and pick up the most powerful weapon of the next decade. He smiled. It was the first time he had smiled since he had woken up, and the smile was not the smile of a 14-year-old boy. It was the smile of a man who had been murdered by his closest friends, and who had just been handed, by a force he did not yet understand, a key to every locked door he was ever going to face. He logged into Edenverse at the exact moment of launch, not 7 minutes after, right on the bell. He picked his class, but he did not pick Swordsman. He picked the rarest class in the launch roster, a class called Wandering Scholar, which nobody picked because its starting equipment was a book and a stick, and its first 3 levels were considered useless by every guide that had been published in the original timeline. He picked it because, 18 months into the original timeline, the Wandering Scholar class had received a hidden quest line that turned it into the most powerful caster build in the game. The quest line was in the launch build, it was just not advertised, and he was going to start it on day 1. He spawned in Green March. The village looked exactly as he remembered, which was strange because his memory of Green March was sentimental and golden, and the actual Green March was kind of muddy and crowded with 3,000 other new players running around in confusion. He walked through them. He did not hurry. He went to the well at the center of the village, the one he had walked past 10,000 times in his original life and never thought about. He performed the sequence from the documentation. 3 taps on the western stone, a specific phrase in the old Edenverse trade language, which most players had not bothered to learn. A coin dropped in. The stones at the base of the well slid back. A staircase opened. 3 other players standing nearby noticed. One of them, a girl whose handle floated above her head in soft pink letters, the handle being Mira, walked over to him with an expression of complete confusion. "How did you do that?" she said. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Because the girl standing in front of him, the new player with the soft pink handle and the cheap starter armor and the puzzled face, was Mira Tanaka, who in his original life had become, over the course of 8 years, the most legendary archer in the entire Edenverse. Who had been one of the few members of his guild who had not drawn a blade against him in the chamber at Velenost, who had died, in the original timeline, in a server incident 2 years after his own death, in a way that the corporation had never adequately explained. She did not know any of this yet. She was 14, like him. She was playing the launch of a new game with a handle she had picked because she liked the sound of it. She had no idea that the person standing in front of her was going to know her for the rest of her life, and that he was going to do everything in his power to make sure her ending, this time, was different. He smiled at her. A small smile. Not the killer's smile, the brother's smile. "Come on," he said. "I will show you." And he stepped down into the staircase, and Mira, after a moment of hesitation that lasted exactly the right amount of time, followed. I am going to pause the narrative here, because what I have just told you is the opening of a story that lasted 4 years in real time, and I cannot tell you all of it in one video. But I want to give you the shape of what happened next, so that you understand why this case file matters, and why I have spent 6 months trying to verify it. In the 17 days before the first patch, Ren Haywood, playing under a new handle that I am not going to share publicly because his current safety depends on it, accumulated 3 legendary weapons, 4 hidden class titles, a private fortress in a region that other players would not discover for another 2 years, and a network of 7 other early players who, like Mira, would in the original timeline have become major figures, and who in this new timeline became the founding members of something he did not yet call a guild. He never used the name Prophet. He never used the name Order of the Late Hour.
Those names belonged to a dead man, and he was not interested in resurrecting them. He picked something quieter, something that I am also not going to say out loud tonight for the same reasons. Over the following 4 years, he systematically located every member of the original Order of the Late Hour in their current young and unaware state, and he watched them. He did not approach most of them. He did not try to befriend them or warn them or change them. He simply observed. Because the question that consumed him in those years was not, how do I take revenge? The question was, who were these people before they killed me? What had I missed? What had I refused to see? What he found in those 4 years of patient watching broke him a second time. Because the truth was that the betrayal at Velenost had not been a sudden corruption. It had not been a moment of greed. It had been written into the character of every person involved from the moment he had first met them. The signs had been there. The small cruelties, the casual lies, the way Kai Vorlin talked about people who were not in the room, the way Sarah Lynn laughed when other players failed. Ren had seen all of it in the original timeline, and he had explained it away every single time, because they were his friends, and friends do not betray each other, and surely the warning signs meant something else. In the new timeline, he did not explain anything away. He looked at the same people, at 15 and 16 and 17 years old, and he saw in their unformed faces the exact same patterns that would, given time, harden into the people who killed him on a stream watched by 4 million. He did not stop them. He did not warn anyone. He did not try to redeem them. He simply walked the other way. And this is the part I want you to hold on to. This is the part that the researchers have not been able to explain and that I think is the actual key to the case. The revenge Ren Haywood took in the new timeline was not violence. It was not the destruction of his enemies. It was not the building of a counter-empire to crush them. It was absence. He removed himself from the trajectory that would have brought them into his life. He built a different kingdom in a different part of the world with different people. He let the Order of the Late Hour form in its original shape without him in it. They rose exactly as they had risen in his memory, with all their stolen glory and their thin loyalties. And without his presence as the center of gravity that held them together, they collapsed within 30 months. There was no chamber at Velenost in this timeline. There was no murder. There was just a guild that quarreled itself to pieces, and a handful of former friends who drifted into the long tail of forgotten players, none of them ever knowing that they had once been famous in a future that no longer existed. He did not punish them. He did not need to. He simply did not give them the opportunity to become what they had become. I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think it is the most important thing I am going to say tonight. We live in a culture that has built its entire entertainment industry around the idea that the second chance is for revenge. The back. But they do not feed anyone. What Ren Haywood did with his second playthrough was not satisfying in the sugar way. It was the slower thing. It was the thing the old fables in his grandmother's worn book had been quietly trying to teach all along. The clever boy who outsmarts the cruel king does not, in the original versions of those stories, kill the king. He walks past the king. He builds a different kingdom in a different valley, and the king, deprived of the boy's attention, deprived of the boy's resistance, withers into irrelevance, because cruelty without a target is just sadness in a crown. This is not a moral I invented. This is what the stories have always said, in every culture, in every century, before our particular moment decided that revenge was the only legitimate response to wound. Helena Haywood read those stories to her son because she knew, the way mothers always know, that he was going to need them. And he did need them, just not in the timeline she lived through.
Which brings me to the last thing I have to show you tonight. The thing I promised at the beginning, the thing that is not just about Ren Haywood, the thing that is about every single one of us. 6 months ago, when I started investigating this case, I assumed I was investigating a glitch, a one-time anomaly in a strange piece of software that had bled into reality. I assumed Ren was unique. I assumed the notification that woke him up in his 14-year-old body was an error. I no longer think that. What I think now, and what I am going to spend the next several videos in this series exploring, is that the architecture of the convergence, the strange, layered reality that has been our home for the last 7 years, is not what we have been told it is. I think the developers, whoever they actually are, have been running this experiment for much longer than 7 years. I think the launch of Edenverse was not the beginning. I think it was the moment when something that had always been quietly present in human life became, for the first time, visible. I think every single one of us, in some form, has been given the same notification Ren got. The Book of Fables, the mother's late-night warning. The quiet voice that says, "You have been here before, you can do this differently, you do not have to play it the same way this time." I think we have all heard it. I think most of us have learned to dismiss it as imagination, as déjà vu, as the residue of dreams.
I think Ren's only real difference is that he believed it. And the reason I think this, the actual evidence, is something I uncovered 3 weeks ago in a server log that should not exist, in a directory that was supposed to have been wiped during the Convergence rollout. The log contains a list of names, not handles, not player IDs, names, real names, 12,000 of them. Each name is paired with a number. The number, after weeks of cross-referencing, appears to be the count of times that person has woken up. My name is on the list. The number next to it is 17. I do not know what that means yet. I am not going to pretend I do. But I am going to tell you that the moment I saw it, I understood why I had spent 6 months unable to let this story go. I understood why every other case I had investigated had felt like a distraction. I understood why I had been drawn to Ren Haywood, of all the strange names in the strange archive of the Convergence, with the kind of pull that does not feel like curiosity, but like memory. I have played this game before. So have you. The question is not whether you are on the list. The question is, what number is next to your name? And whether this time, you are going to do the thing differently. I do not have the answers yet, but I am going to keep looking, and I am going to bring you with me. In the next video in this series, I am going to take you inside the architecture of the Convergence itself, into the place the developers do not want anyone to see. I am going to introduce you to a man who calls himself the Architect, who I have been in correspondence with for the last 7 weeks, and who claims to have built the system that wakes people up. I am going to show you what he says, what I can verify, and what I cannot. And I am going to show you the part of the server log that I have not shown anyone yet, the part that suggests this experiment, whatever it is about to enter its final phase. Stay close, subscribe if you have not, and if you have ever, in your own quiet moments, felt that you have lived this day before, that you have made this mistake before, that you have heard this voice before, leave one word in the comments. Just one. The word is awake. I will read every single one of them. My name is Luna. The story I just told you is true to the best of my ability to verify it, and someone, somewhere, was watching me tell it. Until next time.